Have you ever felt the pull of something, someone you couldn't explain? A gaze that felt like home, even though you've never been there. A presence that unraveled your sense of time, logic, and even who you thought you were. Maybe you crossed paths in a crowded place. Maybe it was an ordinary moment, yet everything inside you stilled. It wasn't chemistry. It wasn't coincidence. It was something far older. Something written in the folds of your soul long before your body remembered it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Sifos Depth channel and join our community where you'll get early access to new videos and insights on personal and spiritual growth. And tell us in the comments, have you ever felt drawn to someone without knowing why? Where did it lead you? Now let's begin. There are rare moments in life when the heart knows something the mind cannot comprehend. These are not moments of reason or planning. They're not built from compatibility checklists or romantic timing. They arise from somewhere far beneath the surface, from the collective unconscious, that vast psychic ocean Carl Jung spoke of, filled with symbols, archetypes, and truths that shape the human experience whether we acknowledge them or not. When two souls meet under these circumstances, it doesn't feel like the start of something. It feels like a return, as if you've stumbled into a memory that predates this lifetime. And perhaps in some way, you have. We don't always know what we're searching for in love. Most of the time, we move through the world unconsciously chasing an image and echo of something imprinted deep within. Not just from past relationships, but from myths we've absorbed, dreams we've half forgotten, the stories we loved as children, the unmet emotional imprints from our earliest attachments. These internal images archetypes are more than fantasy. They are the psyche's navigational stars. And when someone appears who embodies that image, even slightly, the heart responds before the mind has a chance to intervene. It feels magnetic, mysterious, sometimes overwhelming. You recognize something in them, something you didn't know you'd lost. Sometimes it's courage, sometimes softness, sometimes it's your shadow, that part of you that's been repressed or denied, now appearing in someone else's eyes, calling you home. This is the unconscious draw, and when it happens, it doesn't ask for your consent. It arrives, it pulls, and it lingers. This isn't infatuation, it's initiation. Because when love is real, when it's destined, it rarely arrives peacefully. It disrupts, it disturbs, it destabilizes the ego's plans. That's the point. True love, especially the kind rooted in destiny, doesn't come to complete you. It comes to awaken you, to show you the parts of yourself you've neglected, forgotten, or buried in order to survive. It turns love into a mirror, one that doesn't flatter, but reflects. And if you're paying attention, that reflection changes everything. You might feel it in the way your voice trembles the first time you speak to them, in the way you suddenly question everything you thought you knew about yourself. You may feel vulnerable, exposed, seen in a way that is both terrifying and liberating. This isn't just about another person, it's about the self being stirred from sleep. That's why destiny doesn't always feel like a fairy tale. Sometimes it feels like an earthquake. But even in the confusion, there's something strangely familiar. Synchronicities begin to appear. Those uncanny coincidences that feel like whispers from the universe. A song plays just as you think of them. A dream foretells their arrival. A book falls open to a passage that speaks your exact feelings. The events defy logic, yet feel orchestrated by something greater. These are not accidents. They are symbolic alignments, echoes from the deep that hint. This moment, this meeting, this pullet matters. Jung called this synchronicity, a principle that suggests our inner world and the outer world are not separate, but in conversation. And when love is destined, the universe begins to respond to that dialogue, not with commands, but with invitations. A glance across a room, a shared silence that says more than hours of conversation. A missed encounter that somehow circles back days, months, or even years later because something unfinished was always waiting to begin. And yet, as powerful as these moments are, they don't guarantee ease. Destined love doesn't promise simplicity. It often arrives cloaked in resistance. The timing is wrong. One or both are unavailable. The differences are too great, or the fear is too loud. But the pull remains. The connection doesn't dissolve in the face of logic. It intensifies in spite of it. That's because this love isn't about comfort. It's about growth. It's the soul's way of saying, here is the person who will challenge your armor, disrupt your patterns, and ask you to meet yourself more fully. It's not a gift. It's a mirror. And sometimes, mirrors crack before they reflect clearly. So the ego panics. It resists. It strategizes and retreats. It says, this doesn't make sense. This can't work. I'm not ready. But something deeper whispers, stay. And that whisper is relentless. Because when two souls are called to meet by destiny, the call doesn't fade. It doesn't vanish after a few missed texts or misunderstood gestures. It waits, it watches, and it works beneath the surface, rearranging things quietly, your beliefs, your path, your heart, until something in you softens enough to listen. But listening doesn't mean surrendering blindly. True love asks for presence, not submission. Presence to the fear, presence to the timing, presence to the messy, miraculous unfolding of two people who are learning to love without masks. And that unfolding is anything but linear. Some destined connections arrive early before the soil is ready. They bloom too fast, then wilt in the harshness of unhealed wounds. Others show up later, after decades of detours. But always, the seed was planted long before the meeting. Because the blueprint for this love is not written in the stars. It's written in the self. Jung called this the process of individuation, the integration of your fragmented parts into wholeness. And love, when it is real, when it is destined, becomes a crucible for that process. The other person becomes not your missing half, but your living reflection. Not your savior, but your sacred mirror. They challenge you not to hurt, but to awaken, to stop performing, to stop pretending, to stop living from the parts of yourself that kept you safe, but never whole. And when two people accept that challenge, when they lean in rather than run, the love that emerges is unlike anything they've ever known. It's not perfect, but it's true, and truth, once tasted, is hard to forget. Even if the path is interrupted, even if time or distance or fear separates them, the imprint remains. A resonance that lingers beneath the surface of things. A knowing that no other connection can quite replicate. Because the purpose of that love wasn't to complete you. It was to reveal you, to strip away what was never yours, to summon what was always waiting, to return you not to a person, but to yourself. And that, perhaps, is the most sacred gift of all. And after that revelation, nothing is ever quite the same. It's not that the world changes, but your gaze does. You begin to see beneath surfaces, hear between silences, sense meaning in the timing of things. That one encounter, that one person, didn't just awaken your heart. They shifted the axis of your perception. Everything you once believed about love begins to unravel, not into cynicism, but into something quieter, something more enduring. Clarity. You find yourself less impressed by intensity and more attuned to presence. You begin to crave honesty, not the kind dressed up in pretty words, but the raw, uncomfortable kind that leaves no room for illusions. The kind of honesty that says, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm here, fully. And this is the afterglow of destiny's touch. It doesn't just stir longing, it stirs readiness. Readiness to finally meet the truth of your own being. Because that's what the encounter was always pointing toward, not just to them, but to you. Who you are, what you carry, and what you're capable of becoming when you stop hiding. At first, you might resist this new depth. You might try to return to the way things were. Safer loves, shallower conversations, predictable rhythms, but you'll find that you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't pretend that your soul didn't recognize itself in someone else's eyes. You can't erase the feeling of being known without needing to explain. And so, the journey deepens not with them necessarily, but because of them. They've activated something, and now, that something insists on becoming. This is when individuation begins in earnest, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You begin to crave honesty, not the kind dressed up in pretty words, but the raw, uncomfortable kind that leaves no room for illusions. Not will they come back, or not was it real, but what in me was ready to awaken through them. Happy to. What parts of myself came alive in their presence? What shadow did they mirror back that I'm now ready to claim? You see, destiny isn't about whether someone stays. It's about what they came to deliver. And often, what they deliver is a rupture, a rift in the fabric of who you thought you were, tearing just wide enough for the truth to shine through. Sometimes that truth leads to union, other times to separation. But in either case, the calling remains. Become who you were meant to be. And here's what's extraordinary. This process is mutual. If the connection was truly guided by destiny, they felt it too. Even if they ran, even if they buried it, even if they pretended not to care, somewhere, deep in the blueprint of their being, something shifted. Maybe they weren't ready. Maybe their soul had more to unravel before it could return. But you weren't imagining it. The soul knows when it's been stirred. And while the mind might demand answers, closure guarantees the soul is patient. It doesn't need a neat conclusion. It trusts the rhythm of timing. It understands that some people are meant to break you open, not hold you together. And that breaking, it's not destruction, it's birth. You begin to see this reflected everywhere. The books that fall into your hands, the lyrics that echo your thoughts, the dreams that bring back their face not to haunt, but to remind. That your story is still unfolding, that their presence, however brief, was the ignition. But you are the flame, and that flame, it begins to guide you. You start choosing differently, not from fear or lack, but from alignment. You stop bending to fit where you no longer belong. You stop negotiating your worth. You start speaking more slowly, from deeper places. You begin to inhabit your own body differently, as if returning home after years away. This isn't healing in the cliché sense. This is integration. And in this integration, you begin to understand why destiny doesn't always give you what you want. It gives you what you need. The person who arrived wasn't perfect. They may have challenged you, triggered you, left you, but what they awakened was the exact key that unlocked the next stage of your growth. Without them, you might still be asleep, playing roles, numbing, pretending. With them, something began. And whether they return or not, the journey continues. You now walk with a deeper pulse, an inner compass, one that listens less to external noise and more to internal resonance. You don't chase anymore. You attract. You don't strive for love. You embody it. And that embodiment changes everything. It changes who you allow into your space. It changes how you speak, how you rest, how you dream. It changes the way you hold yourself, not out of pride, but because you now know what it means to be held spiritually. And in this place, this new inner territory, you begin to understand the real meaning of destiny. It's not about fated outcomes. It's about aligned becoming. The soul's design unfolding in real time, moment by moment, heartbreak by breakthrough. It's about remembering that love was never outside of you, that the person who arrived was never the destination. They were the signal, one that listens less to external noise and more to internal resonance. And you now awakened are the response. And in that response, you find something even deeper than desire. You find devotion to truth, devotion to your becoming, devotion to love. Not the fleeting, performative kind, but the kind that rearranges your molecules, the kind that strips away everything false and leaves you naked in front of your own soul, saying, "Here I am." At last. So what happens next? Perhaps they return, perhaps they don't. But the need for certainty fades, because you're no longer holding your breath for someone to come back. You're inhaling your own life, and exhaling all the ways you once abandoned yourself in search of them. And maybe, just maybe, if the stars align and both souls are ready, and the egos have softened, and the inner work has been done, you'll meet again. Not as seekers, but as mirrors. Not as halves, but as whole beings, walking side by side. Not to complete each other, but to celebrate what was born the moment you first recognized them, yourself. And when you reach this place, this grounded, luminous place of presence, the hunger that once drove you softens. You no longer look to others to tell you who you are. You no longer need someone to fill a space inside you because you've begun inhabiting it yourself. The echo that once cried out for completion has quieted, not because it's no longer there, but because it's been met not by another, but by your own soul answering back. This is the paradox of destined love. It often awakens us through the other, only to lead us back to ourselves. There's a kind of romance in that, a sacred romance with your own becoming. A remembrance that the one you've been searching for has always lived inside you, waiting to be recognized. And while the world may call this loneliness, you understand now that it's intimacy of the highest order. From this place, your heart begins to open again, not because it's desperate, but because it's ready. Ready to love not out of fear of being alone, but from the joy of sharing your inner abundance. You're not searching for someone to rescue you from your darkness. You've already sat with it, befriended it, understood its purpose. What you seek now is resonance, not rescue. This is when new people begin to appear. Souls who recognize not just your light, but the shadow that shaped it. People who meet you where you are because they too have walked through the fire. And the conversations are different. They're not built on performance, on curated personas or carefully timed replies. They come from the belly, the heart, the marrow. They flow like water, fierce and soft at the same time. But even here, the imprint of the one who awakened you remains. Not as a longing, but as a symbol. You no longer ache for their return in the same way. You understand that their presence had a sacred task. Maybe they were never meant to stay. Maybe their role was to break the shell so your spirit could breathe. And now that it breathes, it sings. And that song, quiet, strange, magnetic, calls others toward you. Not because you're performing, but because your presence itself has become a kind of beacon. You've stopped hiding your heart. You've stopped apologizing for your depth. You've stopped asking for permission to feel, to want, to dream. That energy is unmistakable. It's the energy of someone who has touched destiny and didn't flinch. Of someone who said yes, not just to love, but to transformation. This doesn't mean the path is suddenly smooth. There will still be moments of doubt, of longing, of nostalgia that creeps in unexpectedly when a certain song plays or a place reminds you of a memory you thought you'd forgotten. But now, you hold those moments differently. You don't drown in them. You let them pass through you like weather, temporary, informative, beautiful in their own way. And you keep moving, because that's what destiny taught you. That the point was never to possess someone else. It was to awaken something in you that could never be put back to sleep. You begin to understand love not as a transaction, but as a transmission, a frequency, a force that moves through people, moments, stories, not to give you something, but to grow something in you. Sometimes that love returns, changed, evolved, aligned. Other times, it doesn't. But either way, you no longer cling. You trust the rhythm of your own unfolding, because you've seen what happens when you resist it. And you've seen what happens when you surrender. That surrender becomes your new compass. It doesn't mean you give up. It means you stop forcing. You stop rushing. You stop trying to bend timing to your will. Instead, you begin to listen. To your intuition, to your body, to the signs that the world offers when you're still enough to notice. Because the universe does speak. Not in the language of logic, but in the subtle choreography of synchronicity. A call you weren't expecting. A page you randomly flipped to that says exactly what you needed to hear. A dream that reminds you of who you were before you forgot. And the more you listen, the more it speaks. You begin to live in partnership with something greater, not as an abstract concept, but as a living rhythm. And this rhythm guides you, sometimes gently, sometimes through storms, but always toward your becoming. And the love that returns in this space, if it returns differently. It is no longer built on projection. It is no longer desperate for affirmation. It no longer seeks to own or be owned. It is free, it is clean, it is conscious. It is two souls walking beside one another, not to complete, but to witness, to support each other's evolution, to speak truth, not to manipulate, but to liberate. And if that love never returns in the form you hoped, you don't collapse, because you've already returned to yourself. And that self, the one you abandoned in search of someone else, is no longer waiting in the shadows. It's dancing in the light, and it's that dance that draws new love toward you. Love that doesn't flinch at your depth, that doesn't mistake your quiet for weakness, that doesn't fear your fire, but joins it, amplifies it, honors it. Because that love is not coming to save you. It's coming to meet you, exactly where you are, exactly as you are. No masks, no performance, no pretense, just presence. And maybe that's what destiny really is. Not a pre-written script, but a permission slip. To show up, fully, honestly, courageously. To stop performing love and start being it. So when people ask if you believe in soulmates, you smile. Not because you're a romantic, but because you've lived it. You've felt the pull. You've faced the fire. You've watched someone arrive like a storm and leave like a lesson. And you're still here. Wiser, softer, stronger, still open, still listening. Because you now understand, when destiny calls, it's not always loud. It whispers, in dreams, in symbols, in heartbreak, in hope. And if you're brave enough to follow those whispers, you'll find the kind of love that doesn't just change your life, it awakens it. And what happens after that awakening is not always what people expect. It's not the crescendo of a romantic movie. It's not the kind of ending that wraps everything in a bow. What happens is something far more real, far more sacred. You begin living from a different center, not the conditioned self, not the wounded self, but the true self. This center is quiet. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't seek control. It simply knows. It's not arrogant, but it is clear. And that clarity changes everything. Not because life gets easier, but because your presence within it becomes more stable, more coherent, more you. The love you once thought you needed now becomes love you give not recklessly. Not to prove your worth, but because you've realized you are the source. You no longer wait for love to knock on your door to feel whole. You've gone out into the forest of your own heart and found the firewood. You've built the fire yourself, and you burn now, softly but steadily. That steadiness is what others begin to notice. Even those who once overlooked you or misunderstood you. They may return, curious, confused, compelled by something they can't quite name. But you know what they're sensing. They're sensing your alignment. And alignment is magnetic. But now, you don't open the door for just anyone. You don't entertain energy that feels like a test you've already passed. You don't re-enroll in lessons you've already embodied. You honor your growth too much to repeat the cycles that nearly destroyed you. This discernment is not coldness. It's wisdom. It's knowing the difference between connection and confusion. between chemistry and chaos, between attraction and alignment. You don't get swept up anymore. You don't fall into love, you walk with it. And when someone arrives who walks with you, not ahead, not behind, not pulling or pushing, you know, it's not fireworks, it's not obsession, it's recognition, a calm remembrance, like two notes of the same song finally played together. You see them, not as a fantasy, but as a human being, with flaws, with fears, with their own process, and they see you not as a savior, but as a mirror, not as a puzzle piece, but as a presence, and together you grow, not into one another, but alongside one another. This kind of love has space to breathe, how you rest, how you dream, to speak and be silent, to disagree and still stay. It's not about possession, it's about presence, and it doesn't ask you to give up your path. It joins it. When love and destiny converge like this, it no longer feels urgent. It feels inevitable, not because you need it to survive, but because you're finally in the vibration where that kind of love can land. But even if it doesn't, if life keeps that union at a distance, you're not waiting anymore. You're living, creating, rooting, sharing. You become a guide for others, sometimes silently, simply through the way you move. People feel safer around you, not because you're perfect, but because you're honest. You've stopped pretending, stopped seeking approval, stopped outsourcing your truth. And in doing so, you've become a tuning fork, a frequency others can align to, a signal to those who are still lost in the noise of shoulds and shame and scarcity. You don't need a platform. You are the platform. A living example of what it looks like to say yes to destiny, even when it made no sense, even when it hurt, even when it required letting go of what you loved most. Because letting go didn't destroy you. It refined you. That refinement now lives in your posture, your tone, your silence. It's in the way you say no without apology, in the way you say yes with your whole heart, in the way you no longer chase people, but call them in simply by being who you are. You are no longer a seeker of love. You are an embodiment of it. And yes, there will be days where you forget, where you slip back into old patterns, where the longing returns, where the what-ifs whisper. But now you have the tools, the awareness, the center, and you return faster, with more grace, with less shame, because you know this is the path. This is what it means to walk with destiny, to trust what arrives, to release what leaves, to stand in the fire of transformation without needing it to make sense. You don't ask, why did this happen to me? One anymore. You ask, what is this waking up in me? And that shift, that sacred shift, is what makes you unshakable. Carl Jung believed that when we connect with someone from the depths of the soul, we don't just see them. We see the blueprint of who we were always meant to become. That person, that connection, becomes a portal, not to a fantasy, but to wholeness. So if you're in the fire now, longing, breaking, remembering, trust that it is not in vain. Trust that the pain is carving space for something more, something truer, something so deeply aligned with your essence that when it arrives, it won't just feel like a partner. It'll feel like a mirror, a home, a breath you've been holding for lifetimes. And if you've already emerged from that fire stronger, clearer, more whole, share what you've learned. The world needs more hearts that remember, more voices that tell the truth, more presence that doesn't flinch, because this is how we change everything, not through grand gestures, but through soul-level remembrance. That love, when it's real, when it's aligned, when it's sacred, doesn't come to complete us. It comes to awaken us. And once awakened, you cannot go back to sleep. So if your heart is still echoing with the memory of someone who cracked you open, honor that. They were the catalyst. You are the completion. You are what remains. And what remains is enough. You are the love you were searching for. You are the one you were waiting for. And destiny? It's not ahead of you. It's within you, already unfolding, already here. If this message stirred something deep in your soul, write in the comments, "I remember who I am." That way, we know this found you at the right time. And don't forget to subscribe to Sifos Depth, where we explore the unseen layers of love, destiny, and the inner world. You are not alone. This journey is sacred, and it's only just beginning.